Well, now welcome to our first speaking event for EconoQuest. I would just start this off by saying it has been one heck of a last 2 or 3 years with the pandemic and all of the global events that have taken place. And many of you in this program are studying the kind of economic effects that we're seeing from these from these events, the impact of these events. And that's what this panel is here to talk to you about. We're going to try to drill down and to try to help us all understand what is happening a seemingly 10 million miles away and what impact that can have on you, your family, your school, your community, and your state very directly. So we have 3 very distinguished guests here today who are going to help us kind of lay this thing out. The format is they'll speak for, maybe 10 or 15 minutes all in, and then they're looking for your questions, your comments, your thoughts on the impact of global events on Montana's economy. So to my immediate right is Bob Seidenschwarz. Bob is one of the presidents emeriti of the Montana World Affairs Council. He is a registered representative at IDS Financial Services. And he is also a host of our radio program, Council on the Radio, and a visiting scholar at the University of Montana. To Bob's right is Jenni West. She joined the Montana Manufacturing Extension Center in 2014 as interim business manager and now serves as the associate director. Jenni has over 24 years of experience in both public sector and private industry. And to Jenni's right is Mary Craigle. She's the bureau chief for the Census and Economic Information Center at the Montana Department of Commerce. She also serves as the operations manager for the Praxis Center, North America's first dedicated rural healthcare simulation training center. So to our distinguished panel, just to set up the question here a bit is, you don't have to look very far to see these extraordinary events over the past few years and how they have impacted the global economy and by extension, our own state economy. Could you give us I'm asking 2 things really. First is to broadly situate the Montana economy and the global economy, and then your thoughts and perspectives on the impact of recent events on our state's economy. Mary, if we could start with you, and then Mary, Jenni, Bob, and then open for questions.
We all love technology.
Yeah, well, push it once, Lincoln, and it turns off.
I agree.
Got it. Good morning. How are you guys? Good. So like Chris said, I'm actually an economist. I got my master's degree in quantitative analysis. Love numbers, love everything about data. But what I learned a long time ago about data in numbers is that they're always in a context. And in the Montana economy, I'm sure you've all heard the butterfly flies in the forest, flaps its wings, something on the other side of the world happens. Well, that's actually true when it comes to economies. Economies are now, these days, intensely intertwined with each other, and small events on one side impact the Montana economy in big ways. So first, let me talk a little bit about things that you may not have thought of. So let's talk about the pandemic. So the pandemic was terrible, right? And it was awful for everything. Not so much. So in Montana, there were a couple of things the pandemic did that were actually positive for the Montana economy. First, like it or not, there was an influx of population. And the reason that's good for the economy, that means a growing economy, that means more workers, means more businesses. So that's actually a good thing. Historically, I serve as the state demographer. You guys know what that is? They keep track of people and numbers and how many of them. Historically, we've grown at about 1% as a state. Texas, so we gained about 10,000 people a year. Texas is growing at 225,000 people a year. So for our economy to stay competitive with other states in the US, we need that influx of population. Right now, the last 2 years, it's been about 1.7%. Not that big, but it's still more than it was. Another thing that the pandemic was good for Montana was actually tourism. So interestingly, because our cases were lower than other parts of the nation, and we all social distance before it was cool, right? If you're in Montana, you don't want to be too close to somebody. We actually did not have the downturn in tourism, and this past year we've had a 41% increase in tourism lodging tax rates. Now, some of that's just people charging more money, right? $735 a night for a hotel in Bozeman. Crazy. $320 in Helena. But that overall means what for our economy? More revenue, more interest, more understanding of Montana. The other thing that interestingly what happened during the pandemic, our poverty rate went down. So in 2019, our poverty rate was 12.6% of residents. Now it's about 11.9%. Now, it's actually within the margin of error. So I didn't get too excited about that, but 10 years ago, it was pushing 16%. So we're heading in the right direction for those things. The crisis in Ukraine, wheat prices, record high, $9.65 compared to $7.58 a year ago. And the other final thing is the coal transition. So the coal transition is a terrible thing, right? That, you know, they're not buying Montana coal. That's going to be really bad on our economy. Not so much. So we've actually, the governor just last week signed an agreement with 3 other states to go after a hydrogen hub. We're likely to get it. So transitioning our economy from dependency on one major natural resources to opening it up to a lot more natural resources. My shop in the past, since 2007, we've been responsible for about $5.7 billion in investment, and most of that's been in energy. A lot of wind farms, battery manufacturing, a new malt plant for those of you that like beer. And but you know, we quietly work back to help the Montana economy, and we're actually never worked more frantically. We've never had more interest in Montana than we have right now. So that's sort of my perspective on some of how those global events impacted us.
Okay, you guys can hear me all right? So I'm Jenni West, Montana Manufacturing Extension Center, and I'll just give you a quick overview of who we are. So we're part of the College of Engineering at MSU, but we're also part of a national network of centers. So there's one in every state like ours. We basically provide training and consulting services to small and medium-sized manufacturers. And in Montana, up until recently, that has been every manufacturer in the state. So it's defined as manufacturing facilities that have fewer than 500 employees. And I think we might have 2 or 3 now that are above that. Workforce has been growing a lot. Actually, Montana's grown more than double the national average in manufacturing output and employee growth. And for the last, well, in 2021, it was more than double. And prior to that, it had been leading above the national average for several years. So manufacturing is growing a lot in Montana. One of the things I wanted to ask is, what is manufacturing? Anybody in here have an example of what's manufacturing? Anybody want to?
Making of stuff.
Making of stuff. I like it.
That's the classic economic example. The making of stuff.
Anybody else have something they want to throw out? No wrong answer here. Okay. If you look around the room, can you find anything that's not manufactured?
Easy to manufacture. I saw you.
Right, people, air, water,
Right.
soil, that's about it. So manufacturing, the easy definition that we like to use is either value added agriculture or value added mining, or a combination of those. So you take natural resources you do something to them, and that's manufacturing. So all the food you eat, all the beverages you drink, everything you own pretty much. So just a few stats that to kind of set the base for some of this information coming about global events. There's over 4,100 manufacturers in the state of Montana now, and about 1,700 of those actually have employees. So the others are kind of sole proprietors, maybe making something in their garage, something like that. So 51% of the 1,700 have 5 or fewer employees. And we are tied, or maybe right behind Alaska in the percentage of manufacturing companies that have fewer than 20 employees. So we have about 85% that have fewer than 20 employees. So you can see it's made up of very small companies. The average salary for manufacturing in the state of Montana is about $57,000, and that's compared to a state average salary of about $51,000. So, and that's an average of every position from very entry level all the way up to the owners and the PhDs that start like photonics companies and things like that. So just to talk a little bit about global events, obviously the pandemic hit manufacturing very hard. Everybody shut down initially. They were scrambling, trying to figure out what to do. You can't manufacture remotely. So, it was a totally different environment for them. And the first couple of months were really just scrambling. After that, things actually picked up. So, as Mary said, manufacturing actually has been growing in terms of sales. I mean, everybody's going gangbusters for the most part, but there's challenges, and the biggest challenges that have come along with the recent global events is supply chain. So they can't get what they need to make the stuff that they're putting out the door. Long lead times, price increases. Obviously, we're having workforce challenges because we need more people to work and they're just not available. And that means you have to pay more. So that's been a challenge. Housing prices have been a challenge. So there's a lot of challenges, but on the positive side, manufacturing is still growing like crazy. I have some examples that maybe we'll talk about a little bit more as you guys ask questions, but there are an endless list of things that have been hard to get as a result of the supply chain challenges. And our manufacturers have tried really hard not to pass on the cost to their customers, but obviously they have to do that in order to maintain their margins as well. And so that has been, influencing some of the inflation, right? Everything's going up. So I guess I'll stop there.
Well, Mary, Jen, thank you. Okay. Look at in your minds, look at the world, big globe. Imagine endless infrastructure, different types of capacity, energy pipelines, crisscrossing everywhere, electrical grids, ships, people moving. When you get up in the morning, you start and participate in this whole global dance. And this dance goes on every day. And when it works, it's amazing. I still, after all these years, am in awe of what we've been able to do and accomplish. Our building, our jobs, our technology, advancing quality of life throughout different parts of the world. Never has a planet been healthier in terms of the standard of living, even with all the problems. Now, this dance is a beautiful thing when it works. And then it's not a beautiful thing when it doesn't work. So when you look at global events, Russia invades Ukraine. What does Ukraine and Russia on a combined basis provide a significant amount of to the rest of the world? Foodstuffs, wheat, sunflower, things that we don't even think about. We just know when we go to the store, it's there. You go to Costco, you go to your local shopping supercenters. Whatever is there, do you ever stop for a minute and think, how did it get there? What would happen if it wasn't there? How easy and how quickly life would change if all of a sudden these products and services that we come to take for granted. Just simply, we're not there for any number of different reasons. So when you're thinking about global events, what I want you to come away from this today is the interconnectedness, how intimately connected we all are. So whether somebody said we should be a globalized economy or we should start thinking of not being so integrated to the rest of the world, let me just tell you, it's not going to happen. It's not possible. And we don't have the time right now to go into how deep that reason may be. You can ask that question. We'll do our very best if it comes up. But the fact is, you're not going to bring certain types of manufacturing back to the United States. It's gone. But you can do some things here that may make you more resilient. What we need to understand is resiliency in an economy is absolutely critical to meeting challenges when there's global disruptions. So whether it's an energy crisis, whether it's an invasion of a country, of a sovereign nation, in this case, Ukraine, and what they produce and the bottlenecks that resulted from this, and the disruption to bringing in the wheat harvest or sitting on the dock, not getting the shipping, or what we are really talking about here in terms of global events that are affecting us tremendously is inflation. Classic definition of inflation is too much capital chasing too few goods. So when you look at your gas prices, when you look at your food costs, when you look at the housing costs that we have here in Montana, the people coming in, absolutely a great thing. At the same time, anybody that's paying rent right now is struggling. In Missoula and Bozeman, our housing prices have gone through the roof, which means the average family can no longer even think about buying a house in these communities. So we're going to see things happening here that have direct impact. For every action, there's a reaction. And in the case of the global events, what I see constantly that drives me absolutely nuts is these are predictable events. And what I mean by this is we set in motion certain behaviors that have consequences. Why we don't think about this? I was talking to three very bright gentlemen here before we came in here. And I pointed out to them that the energy issues we're dealing with right now didn't start with Russia invading Ukraine, but it set the foundational issues that Europe is dealing with right now. Incredibly high energy prices for electricity. That means potentially economic disruption, industry shutting down, consumers paying exorbitant prices. And what, as I said to them, is the common denominator that also can either mitigate or increase the problem. European continent and the United States and other open democratic societies, we get the chance to vote, which means we can do some really stupid stuff and we can do some really smart stuff. So because we are affected, we say to a politician, you got to do something about this. And sometimes that means they don't always do the right thing for the long-term benefit. They do the short-term thing for expediency. So you're constantly dealing with these ebbs and flows, these pressures, these constant decisions that have to be made when there are solutions, but those solutions require long-term thinking. It requires somehow somebody has to give up something in order to get something. And many times we are our own worst enemies. So now Europe made decisions which had a direct impact on their energy availability and their prices. And then on top of that, the effect of what, happens when Russia invades Ukraine has now lent itself to a real crisis that the various EU members who you're going to be getting a chance to speak with Chris moderates his panel, which is on EU resiliency on the energy side, they're struggling with what kind of solutions do you come up with. Now, this bleeds out through the entire economy. And it just doesn't bleed out into Europe, it bleeds out to the United States. Businesses here that are exporting to Europe are going to be affected. And there's also an inverse all the time. So in some cases, we're going to be the beneficiary of some of these problems as well. That's what we're here to try to help you understand in terms of economic literacy. This is why you've taken the time and the energy to be here today. And I promise you, what you will come away from for your days that you're here will open your minds and put you on a different road and a different chart of thinking. And that's really the benefit of what we're doing here in terms of Chris and Nikki and the people that have put so much energy into this. So I want to stop right now because I'm just getting warmed up and I can keep going on. And you guys are going to be like, please, we got a million questions. So let's open this up to questions. I hope we've given you kind of a nice foundational component to start this discussion with. So let's get some questions. Let's talk about what we've just presented to you in terms of the energy issues, resiliency, food shortages, inflation, housing, all the things that are part of our daily life. Chris?
Excellent. Thank you very much to the panel. Now, feel free to come up here, ask your question. You can have a line here if you like. If there are people, I'm sure you've got those questions. Please, now is your time to pose questions. Over to you.
And please give us your name.
Hi, my name is Ryan. I'd just like to ask, where do we see, how do we see the cost of living in Montana change 20 years from now? Where will it be?
Cost of living?
I
Yeah.
can take,
Mary, you've got the stats, so go ahead.
I'm stats girl.
Yep.
So we actively, thanks, Seth. Yeah, okay. We actively, get what's called the COLI, which is the cost of living index. And Montana historically, I'm going to go backwards to go forward. Economists always do that, just so you know, Ryan. We go backwards to go forward. Historically, Montana's been a lower cost of living, but not so much in recent years. We're more in the midpoint, and with the cost of housing and with the cost of, as Bob and Jenny were talking about, all these inputs and things changing, it's kind of hard to know exactly where we're going, but what I can tell you is it's not sustainable where it is now. So housing prices will have to come down because, as Bob said, consumers can't buy houses and can't rent. So they're going to have something happen unless magically wages went up. Now, wages have been going up. In fact, Montana wages are growing faster than the national average, but we're still not growing fast enough. And where did we start? Oh yeah, we were 50. And so that whole, you guys get that right, percentage wise, we always look really good because we're tiny. But when you look at the actual numbers or the actual dollars, sometimes we're not doing so great. So my guess is, and Bob was talking about this, and the analogy I always use at work is it's a waterbed. Do you guys know what a waterbed is? It's really kind of dating myself.
Yeah, something from the 70s.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of hippie-ish.
Yeah.
And they were terrible.
Yeah, and they were awful. But when you pushed on one side, there was a reaction on the other side. And that's what has to happen will happen with the economy. The economy will have a stressor like housing prices, like not enough workforce. And so things will have to, over time, equalize. Now, sometimes that takes a while. Are housing prices ever going to be what they were 5 years ago? No, but they will not continue to escalate. And that we're already seeing that as what they are. Will wages continue to grow? Yes. Will they grow at a rate that keeps up with inflation? Possibly. A lot of inflation is actually also due to corporates taking profits, and they should. And you know why? Because they had the pandemic. They had a couple of terrible years. They had things happening, but U.S. companies are in better position on their corporate balance sheets than anywhere in the world. And honest to God, Brian, if we wait 5 years, we're going to be in really good shape if we just don't blow our country up. China has a huge problem right now with its one-child policy. The entire industrial world has a problem because of me, the baby boom, right? 2 jobs for every 1 person. The generation after us did not have enough kids. That's why you see what the workforce shortage is. It is not because people are lazy. If I hear that one more time, I might have to hit them with this mic because it's not true. People are not lazy. You guys are awesome. You guys are the best workers ever on the planet, ever. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mary, I'm going to ask you to expand on something here too. You guys have to remember this, demographics are a key. Understanding demographics will help you understand economic trends. Now, probably all of you have heard there's too many people in the world. We got 7 billion, we're moving towards 9 billion, possibly 10 billion. Oh my God, what are we going to do? Energy, food shortages. You know what? We have enough resources. It's improper allocation of resources. And demographics are a key indicator of a country's economic health. So as Mary said, Europe has had declining birth rates. Guess who has had negative birth rates, which has been one of the drivers for partly the policies that you see coming out of Russia. Russia has had negative birth rates. We're not talking about the Soviet Union anymore, folks. We're talking about the Russian Federation. Putin understood that, and he put in place policy to try to encourage people to have more kids. First, you got to sober up the Russian men if you're going to have more kids. I'm not joking about that. Severe problem. So Russia's birth rate has started to increase. Now, because of this war and what's happening, they are facing serious challenges again. in the not too distant future of a declining birth rate, which is going to have severe economic impacts on the country's ability to reconstitute after this horrendous military, economic, and humanitarian decision.
I kind of like Bob. I'm an Irish friend.
Kindred spirits.
Kindred.
Your mic is done.
Thanks, Ryan, for the question.
Oh,
Sure.
thank you.
Jenny?
I'm Izzy, and this is also a question directed at Mary. So, I heard, like, you had said that the poverty rate in Montana has gone down because of the pandemic. Do you see that as a long-term thing? And also, how does that work in association with the increase in inflation? And is that something we can harness in the long term in Montana and also in the long term in the world? Is that sustainable?
Great. And your name is, sorry,
Izzy.
Izzy. Great. Thanks, Izzy. Great question. Great question. And I want Jenny to weigh in a little bit on this one too. So yes, poverty has gone down. So part of the reason that poverty went down is something called the CARES Act. You guys all know what the CARES Act is? Oh, do you? Yes. So CARES Act, the U.S. government dumped billions of dollars into the economy to keep it going, right? We paid families, we paid businesses, we paid all kinds of folks to keep it going. A lot of economists, me included, probably think that we probably turned that spigot on a little too high, which also is what caused the inflation, but it also is directly what's responsible in some ways for the decline in poverty in our state. The other thing that's happening with the decline in poverty is, again, that in-migration. Those folks that are moving in, they're making higher wages, they're living here remote, working in California, making 200,000 living here, right? So that's another impact that's helping. Is it offset by inflation? Absolutely. So any gain in wages is always going to be offset by prices, higher prices in food, higher prices in gas, particularly. Because if you're poor, right, you still need gas, you still need food, you still need basic necessities. And so it actually is what's called regressive. It impacts you more than it impacts the average person. Again, it'll balance out, but I do think Montana's on a different trajectory than it was 10 years ago in terms of our economy. I do think that the decline in poverty, I don't think, I'm not seeing in the near future any dramatic increase in the levels of poverty. Are we having challenges? Heck yeah. Are you guys having challenges? Heck yeah. So we'll just have to figure that out.
I guess what I could say from a practical perspective, I'm no economist, but as far as manufacturing goes, you know, wages have had to increase to keep people in their homes and to keep, you know, our employers, our manufacturers want to be employers of choice. And so they have to pay and provide other benefits to their employees to, you know, keep them there, right? The fact that manufacturing has been growing as fast as it has in Montana and employment's been going up, and the fact that manufacturing pays better on average than a lot of the other industries, particularly service industries in the state, I think is a good thing for the state. And I hope that that continues and that we're able to continue growing our manufacturing industry, because I think overall that's going to be very good for the state's economy.
Thank you. Next question. We're trying to get as many of you as we can, so we'll try to be brief.
Hi, I'm Nova. Thank you guys for being here, for one. Two, with the Ukraine-Russian war going on right now, and we've seen such a spike in like gas prices and things like that, is that something that we're just going to have to wait out, or is there something we can be doing about it? And also, how long can we expect to see this constant fluctuation?
Great question, Noah.
We have not built a new refinery in decades. This is a real challenge that we're going to face. We are in a battle right now between wanting to move to a renewable future, at the same time absolutely needing what fossil fuels produce. You have EPA issues, you have regulatory, you have governance issues, You have the political side of the equation. You have signals being sent to the energy industry, which is, you guys need to produce more today, but we're going to do everything we can to put you out of business tomorrow. I'm not kidding. It's not a good business place to be when I'm clearly signaling to you that I need you now, but I'm going to do everything I can to move and transition away from you. So there are structural issues. I'll just leave it at that, because if I get going, it'll take 12 o'clock and Chris will go, stop. There are structural issues in addition to supply demand. And this is why you guys are here, to learn about economic principles that will help you. Supply demand issues are real. Structural issues are real. So when you have refineries at max capacity and cost of those refineries because of inputs for biofuels, you run into what are real challenges. And when we don't build new refineries, we're going to look at potential shortages of being able to meet those demands. Now, Mexico is going to be building a $12 billion refinery to make gasoline. But we won't do it here. We'll let somebody else do it, but we'll look better and smarter, because then we're not encouraging it here. So if you don't get it from your own backyard, you're going to be getting it from someplace else. Do I want China to become the major refinery, capital of the world, that we're buying gasoline from a country that's not your friend? I don't think so. So in answer to your question, we have structural issues. Mary, comments?
2 weeks ago, I was actually in Bozeman, and for some unknown reason, I became the keynote speaker for the Utility Economic Development Association. So there were all these folks that were here from all the utilities across the United States, Duke Energy, Louisiana Power, Texas Power, et cetera. And I said to them, I know what you want to know. You want to know what works in Montana that's not working in your state, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so ironically, there is some stuff in Montana that works. And one of the things that Nova, you can do more than anything else, I know you hear it all the time, vote, but also be informed. Go find out what your legislators are doing. Last session, they actually released, passed a law that removes some of the barriers to use of nuclear energy. Nuclear energy, one of the stupidest things I think that Germany ever did was turn off their nuclear power. That's part of what they're facing right now, is this huge shortage because they turned off their nuclear power. Nuclear power, that table over there is about how big some of these new nuclear power operating batteries can be. They're amazing. And I know this because I'm really proud of the work that my little group does, trying to develop the industry. Again, we're not anti-coal at all. What we are is, how do we turn coal into something that keeps the planet safe? Because guess what? Montana has more coal than anywhere else. We're also the only state that has palladium and platinum.
Mm-hmm.
Those are rare earth minerals. Those are critical to your, cell phones, computers, etc. China has 85% of that market. We need to do stuff there. So what can you do? You can find out what Montana has. And then you can find out how each of these different legislators are planning to discuss it and go to Inland. They love you guys. They hate us. I'm a state employee. It's like, oh, go away. I don't want to hear from you. I want to hear from Nova. I want to hear from Izzy. I want to hear from Ryan, because that's the future. And those are my constituents. And that's who I care about.
Mary brings up such a critical point. Germany, that's what I heard earlier about shooting yourself in the foot here. When you look at opposition, always pay attention to the opposition, because they're also key for your point about nuclear energy. Leading environmentalists are now coming out and saying, if we're going to meet our carbon emission data points, we have to use more nuclear energy. But now we have shortages of uranium. So from an investment standpoint, I start thinking, where do you start looking for opportunities? Because there's only so many countries that produce uranium. And some of these countries are not necessarily friendly user places, like Kazakhstan. There's issues and problems. We have the ability to do this in our own backyard, but we run into the regulatory side, and not without good reason. I'm not saying that these things should not be considered and are not concerned. But to Mary's point, do you want to control rare earth minerals, or do you want somebody else as you try to move towards a renewable future? It's a strategic issue. It's a national security issue. Plus, we have regulatory, we have environmental rules, and we have a legal system that protects people. You have mines in different countries in Africa, of which you have children working in conditions that you can only imagine, extracting rare earth minerals. Not something we want to see. Any comments on your part, Jen?
I will make a quick comment because this actually does relate to manufacturing. One of the big pushes at the state level for the last few years has been more value added agriculture. And it's somewhat the same for mining because Montana is incredibly rich in natural resources. And so we need to take advantage of that and do more of the value added for cure as well going forward.
Great question. Great question. You're not a student.
No, I'm a teacher. I just have one quick, well, maybe a quick or easy question, but in my discussions with students and even some of the kids at this conference, one of the biggest concerns, and it's very valid, is they want their piece of the American dream, right? They want their piece of the pie. And yes, I agree that poverty rates have come down. That's great. Wages are starting to go up, also great. But to me, one of the biggest issues is the wealth gap that only continues to worsen. And I understand capitalism seems to be spreading ever more, and I'm not, anti-capitalist by any means. But how do we address the wealth gap to ensure that, poor people in America don't control more wealth than 50% of the country?
Great question. It's super hard.
Yeah.
And the reason it's super hard, there's a guy named Byron White. Ever heard of Byron White? He was a Supreme Court justice. And he was also, before a Supreme Court justice, he was the legal advisor to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And back in the old days, when I was young, there was a guy named Ralph Nader. And Ralph Nader was going around and he was saying, make companies safe, don't make crappy products, don't make Pintos that explode, right? Literally cars that when you ran into the back of them, they blew up. And Justice White, when he was at the chamber, said, we really got to lobby. We really got to lobby against this Nader guy because he's really killing our U.S. businesses. And that was really the first formation of very formalized lobbying across corporations. Corporations used to go, represent themselves, but for them to really defend themselves and their positions in Congress, that really didn't happen much before. Fast forward to 2020, that's all it's about. It's all about the money. And I think the only thing that we can do is really figure out as a country, what do we want our country to be? What do we want our kids to have? Where do we want to go? What did I just say a little while ago? If we wait 5 years, we can be in really good shape relative to China, relative to Russia, relative to Iran, relative to these other countries. But we cannot continue to sustain this wealth gap. My dad was a banker in Great Falls, and he used to talk about the point of families where the rich people would live in compounds and have armed guards, and all the poor people like us would run around and try to make do. Sometimes when I'm in some of the gated communities of Montana, I'm a fourth generation Montana, I kind of feel like I'm in a compound. So what do? We vote. We educate ourselves. We look at what lobbyists are doing. We look at what organizations. It's hard work, folks. You got to dig into it. There's a couple of great organizations. There's an organization called Forward Montana here that looks at that kind of stuff. There's all kinds of get out the vote efforts, et cetera, that look at the issues. I don't care where you stand. What I care about is if you're educated, if you take the time to look into it. You're absolutely right that the domination of wealth among a few hands, not just in the US, but globally, is terrifying. Because there's an old saying, he that has the gold makes the rules, right? And that's kind of what's been going on. Does it have to? No, because we actually, and we outnumber those folks by a lot. And we can make changes if we get ourselves engaged. 80% of Americans are not engaged in political activity. 80%.
And Putin is a classic example of what you're describing. The oligarchs and Putin control a vast majority of the wealth, which means their interests come first, and not the Russian people, which has been destroyed.
Well, from a practical manufacturing standpoint, I think understanding what manufacturing contributes to the overall economy. I mean, the vast majority of manufacturing employees in the US actually are in small manufacturers. It's not just Montana that has a huge percentage of small companies. It's all over the US. And those companies are in danger actually of going under and being left behind because of what she was talking about, baby boomers. So a lot of the company owners are getting ready to retire if they haven't already. And if they don't have a transition plan, that means often the company either goes away or gets bought up by somebody who takes it somewhere else and they join those larger corporations. We have seen a lot of activity in Montana of companies being acquired by other companies, which is not inherently a bad thing. But I just want to encourage everybody here to think about manufacturing for your future and not just something that happens, with other people, but, owning a company or being part of a manufacturing company in a way, doing finances or other things is a way to ensure that that industry stays alive and the small businesses stay intact.
Couple of quick comments. I'm an unabashed capitalist. That's my business as an investment advisor. But you can be a capitalist with a heart. And you have to recognize exactly the question that you posed and some of the answers that we've gotten. We can't have such bifurcation that exists. No society will be healthy. At the same time, you don't want to kill entrepreneurialism. The very basis for what has created so much wealth and opportunity for us. And it starts with your responsibility to yourself to educate yourself about the very questions and discussions we're having right now. That's so important because the jobs you're going to have are going to determine and careers where you go in terms of where you fit in. But that doesn't mean that your activism and that your ability to think intelligently and not follow the crowd becomes very important. This is a real issue in our country, and unfortunately, it's politicized to get the vote from you or to get the vote from me, but doesn't offer the real explanation of how do we bridge it. There's so many reasons behind this, and there is a transition that we're going through right now, but to compete in this world requires education. Thank you.
Hey, my name is Luke. The poverty rates in Montana have been going down, but is that because the wages are going up in general, or is that kind of because poor people are being driven out?
Good question, Lynn. This doesn't appear to be working. So I'll just talk loud because I can't. Luke, it's both, right? But in general, I don't want to get too deep in the workforce question, but let's talk a little bit about workforce. So again, I mentioned, we poured a bunch of money into the economy that helped poverty. We also are an aging population in Montana. We have more above 65. We have less in the 38 to 48 realm. And when people get older, what usually happens? They make more money, right, as they get older until they retire, and then they're at a fixed income. So what you are seeing is a combination of also that aging. So that poverty impact, poor people are not being driven out of Montana. More what has happened is that it's more the demographic change of Montana that you're seeing. Right now in Montana, there are 2 jobs for every 1 worker. We have about 500,000 workers in the workforce, and we're at 2.6% unemployment. Full employment is somewhere probably around 4% here in what they call hyper employment. In Helena, Montana, there are 16,000 workers roughly in the labor force right now. There's 175 available according to the staff. 175 people out of 16,000. What happened to us is the retirees didn't come back after the pandemic. We're fine. We're making that higher money. We're doing okay. We're not coming back. And so employers have been raising wages. They're going to have to keep doing it until workforce stabilizes for a while, especially as long as inflation holds in there. They just simply are not going to be able to keep the businesses open, and unless they continue to do wages. So again, I do not foresee any giant increase in poverty anytime soon, any big bumps. I don't believe that 11% is an acceptable figure, particularly when we have communities in Montana where it's over 20. And so I think to my left, my friend Jenny, and I work all the time trying to figure out how to get manufacturing jobs out to areas where those folks are, or other ways that those folks can work remotely to increase their wages and their standard of living.
And I think Mary and Jim, please weigh in, but I believe you would agree with this. The most insidious tax is inflation. So while you're talking about wages going up, especially for people that were flat for so long, have they actually made any headway? No, because all the cost of goods and services from rent to food to gas has gone up at a much higher rate of percentage. So it's a double-edged sword. Yeah, wages have to go up. And the other component here, as I talked earlier about, how do you think and see connections between different issues? Immigration. We fight like crazy in this country over immigration issues in terms of illegal and people coming in illegally. It becomes a big political battle. Here's the reality. You need immigration in the United States. You need immigration of workers that are doing the entry-level jobs. You also need workers who are coming to this country with the highest level of skill sets. If you want to continue to live the American dream, you want people that want to come here. And you want people that bring skill sets. I'm very selfish about this. I want the best and brightest from all over the world to come here, because that's how you compete. That's how you beat the other guy. And not only beat them into submission, but this is how you keep your edge. But if we don't do something about the inflation, which is what the Fed is trying to do right now, that's why interest rates have gone up so high, so quickly. They're trying to bring inflation out of the economy, because without them, these gains that you're referring to look good on paper, but they're not helping people's daily lives. Jen, some comments on your part?
Yeah, well, I mentioned that, manufacturers are having to raise wages, but like you said, all their other costs are going up too. Some of the manufacturers I've talked to recently, they're not only dealing with supply chain shortages, which cause them to have difficulties potentially with their sales. So their customers are saying, hey, your lead times are too long now. So then they buy lots of inventory. That's a carrying cost. So their costs go up. Another thing that nobody's really talked about yet, but is I think a real consequence of a lot of things happening globally, is cybersecurity. So there's another issue that is happening that is a cost for companies to have to deal with. So you get all these bottom line costs going up, and you're trying not to increase your cost to your customer, so your margins are shrinking. So there's a lot that's going into it, and a lot of challenges for dealing with these issues right now. And inflation is definitely a big part of that.
Thank you. I'm Arthur, and my question is, I know we've been talking about the American dream a lot. So I think a big part of the American dream is each successive generation having a better and better and better standard of living. And my question is, with all the problems happening now, can my generation in America and in Montana live better than our parents, or is that just not something that can realistically happen?
Arthur, it's over. You don't know. Only kidding, lady.
All right. I do not believe that. I think that every successive generation, it sounds like a stupid answer, but what I'm going to say is it kind of depends on your definition of what is a good standard of living, right? Are you going to make as much money as your parents? Probably. Are you going to own as many assets as your parents? Maybe not. Can you get more enjoyment out of life than your parents? Absolutely. Again, I'm the bottom of the baby boom. I was born in 1963. And I was born to the Depression era parents that saved everything, washed tinfoil, for God's sake, and never really enjoyed life. I do not physically remember my parents ever not doing something, working. My mother would watch television, she'd be knitting or she'd be sewing.
Black and white television.
Black and
Can you imagine that, guys?
I'm really,
We didn't have color TV.
yeah. And so they saved all this money and, I inherited it, but, what do? I work all the time. And so I'm just right now, I'm starting a new business. It's a medical simulation company in Butte, Montana. And part of what we are actually integrating in that training is resiliency. And that's something I think is critical for all of you to have, is resiliency. Life is hard. It's very difficult, and you can't have the best life ever. You really can't. I mean, it really comes down to, I'm Scottish, and so I'm a big fan of Gary Bradley, who writes these books that I can't say out loud because it's a swear word, but F your life basically is what this book is. And he talks about, you can think and you can feel good and be positive. Yeah. It doesn't matter. You got to act. And that is the key. If you guys act, you're unstoppable. Your generation is completely unstoppable. You are more highly trained. You have more access to more means of communication to get stuff done faster than any generation that's ever walked the face of the earth. There's absolutely no reason that you guys can't have a better life. Absolutely not. Other than if you don't act, if you, just sit back and watch or do the, positive mantras, but don't grab life and just run with it. It's really not going to happen. But I'm a total believer in the American dream. And I believe I am I'm 60 years old and I'm starting a $33 million business. Because why not? Go big or go home, right? If I can do it, believe me, all you guys.
I guess my only comment is, I agree with everything she just said. I think it's, you make your own path. And certainly from what I see in industry, there's a lot of people out there who are doing what they're doing because it's what they love. So start your own business, go into something that, makes you excited every day to go to work. And making stuff is actually one of the things I think that's extremely interesting and exciting. There's lots of things out there to choose from, but I agree wholeheartedly that you're going to be able to make your own future, and don't forget the things you've learned as a result of our generation's mistakes. Things like, what are you going to do with the stuff after you make it? And it survives for a while, it serves its purpose. Then what? So think about those things as you go forward, and you'll maybe avoid some of those problems.
There's so much that time will not allow. What I will share with you is, I focus a lot on institutions and how amazing our institutions are in this country, with all their faults, with all their problems. Our legal system, unlike anything else in the world. The political system, with all of its problems, still allows us for solving what these problems are. What I will share with you is, I want you to think about, what is your civic responsibility? It's not just enough to be able to look and chase that dream, but along with that dream goes your responsibility to yourself, to your neighbor, to your community, to your state, and to your country. It's a delicate fabric that easily tears. And it requires a lot of love, a lot of attention, but you have to understand what it means to be in this ever-changing country we call America. It's not equal for everybody, we know that. It's got barriers to entry, and that's why we fight so hard legally and politically to change some of these things. And each generation seems to be moving more towards those open opportunities for not just you, but for others who for different reasons have had struggles getting into that place we call America. I describe it as a dog's breakfast. You ever seen a hungry dog in the morning when you put the food down? Within about a minute or two, that food's all over the place. We're a messy place. We always have been a messy place, and we will continue to be a messy place. So my last words on your question is, learn about your civic responsibilities and what it means to be a part of this country and your state and your community.
Melva, yours will be the last question of this session.
Really? Can we not
I know.
keep doing this and bring some food in? I love this with you guys.
Hi, it's Nova again. So my question for you guys is, as our economy and country and state continues to grow, I know that we have like an abundance of natural resources that we absolutely should be utilizing. And my question to you guys is, as a state, should we be more focused on exporting those natural resources to countries like within the EU or like across the world, or should we be more focused on trying to use those to benefit like the states within our own country, and just kind of how that would benefit us and the pros and cons of each?
Okay, I'm going first. again. Thanks, Nova.
You are our lead.
I get apparently I'm the lead. Yeah. Thanks, Nova, for the question. I'm gonna go back to how Bob started, right? We're intertwined everywhere. That's actually a capitalistic question. But it's a policy question. It's just a policy question. And so what we should be doing is what we as Montanans collectively decide to be doing. We have one of the most unique constitutions, did you know that, in the country? Where we actually talk about clean air and water in our in our state constitution. Other states do not do things like that. We talk about the ability to access and equality and standard of life for Montanans. So it's a policy decision. And all those policies, you know where those policy decisions get made? You know where they are? They're in the tax code. I was spent some time at Revenue as a property tax analyst, working in the tax policy area. And I can tell you that what happens in much of the economy in Montana may not be directly driven by taxes, but it's influenced by taxes, and it's influenced by tax credits. And so I would put that back to you guys in terms of if you think we should be keeping more resources at home, change the tax policies and change the export rates and the fees and those kinds of things to make it more advantageous. If you think we should be using those resources to help globalize the world, reduce those tariffs, reduce those impacts, transportation costs that are tacked on. Those are decisions the Montana legislature makes. And when do they meet? Oh yeah, every 2 years for 90 days. So we live in a state where the legislators get 3 months to make all the decisions for our state. And we sit there for 2 years. So if they make, like Bob said, if they make a bad choice, right? 2 years, unless they have a special session, which we don't want them to do. Now, I'm not advocating for more time for the legislature. I just want you guys to be really aware of how much that forms your everyday life in Montana. All those policies and all those questions, but particularly the boring tax code. The boring tax code is probably one of the fundamental biggest impacts on economies, particularly the U.S. economy, of any other factor. As much as labor, as much as the supply chain, is the U.S. tax code.
Can I give a little example exactly what you're talking about here? I mentioned biofuels earlier. The EPA mandates that you have to blend a certain percentage of biofuels with your gasoline production. This was meant in theory to be able to bring down costs, which it hasn't, and reduce pollution. Now there's an offset to that. Now you're putting a lot more acreage in corn production, which means more fertilizer, more water. Now that has consequences too. But there's an interesting part of the tax code. If I manufacture what is required with my blended biofuel for gasoline, there's a very high price that the refiner has to pay. And it's not just the outward price, the cost of doing business and insurance and employees, it goes down the whole supply chain. Now, interestingly, if they refine gasoline and export it, they're not subject to the EPA rule on biofuels. So there's a perfect example of how a taxable requirement or a regulatory requirement actually can distort the market. So at a time when we're asking ourselves to bring the cost of gasoline down, the current administration, by one swipe of the pencil, to change some of the regulatory and tax codes to make the availability of more gasoline and hence in theory, lower prices available. This will be something you will learn throughout your lifetime. And at moments, it will drive you crazy when you realize the hypocrisy and craziness of it all. That's all I'll say.
All politics is local.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean it's not in the city.
I'll just keep my comments very brief, and not policy related necessarily, but just to give you an example of the comment I made about adding value here in Montana before it goes out of the state. Get a larger percentage of the money that's eventually made on the product. We have a lot of cows in Montana, a huge number of cows. more than-
2.3 million.
Yeah, way more than people. We ship those out of state, for the purpose of slaughter and other things to go in food products. There's been a lot of interest in the last couple of years in trying to figure out how to do those processes in Montana so that we can keep that extra value. And the same goes for, food products, a lot of grain products, things like that. So a challenge for you guys is going to be to figure out how to do some of those things so that you get the economies of scale and that you do it in a manner where you can be competitive against those other places.
I think our time is out, and I wanted to say to all of you, I think Mary and Jim would agree, we're available. So between breaks, between opportunities, come up, sit down with us. This is what we're here for you to learn from us and for us to learn from you. So thank you so very much. Our pleasure.
That's a great way to end it. Round of applause.